Hi, my name is Gabe Spanbauer, and for this presentation, I decided to watch Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets, which was released in 2020. You can watch this documentary on Sling, Apple TV Plus, or Amazon Prime. So, before I go over the characters, I want to give a little bit of a background of the plot and the setting of this documentary. So, like I said, that it's a documentary, so there wasn't necessarily any main characters or side characters in the entire film. This took place in a dive bar, and this dive bar was closing the next day. So the documentary takes place the day before, and it's simply just a cameraman that's recording all the interactions and the conversations that the patrons are either having with themselves or the bartender that's there. So there were a lot of characters that were involved with the film, but I only decided to include three because they had like a lot of screen time and I felt like they had the biggest presence in the film. So these three characters were Michael Martin, who is top left, and he was one of the patrons at the bar. He was actually living there. When the film starts, you see that he's shaving his beard because he slept on their couch the night before. And then to his right is Shay Walker. She was one of the bartenders that showed up in the nighttime. So they had bartender at like 10 a.m. And then I think she came in at like it might have been like 5 p.m. or 6, something like that. And then below Shay, we have Bruce Hadnot, who was also a patron at the bar. And like I said, these guys had a lot of screen time. So I felt like I should include these three for the characters list. But there were a lot more. So, to get into the specifics of the setting and plot, this took place in Las Vegas and in 2016. Like I said, it was a dive bar and it was called the Roaring Twenties. And unfortunately, the bar was closing, and the documentary takes place on the day before it closes. And the day actually starts at 11 a.m. And Michael, who was there the night before, so obviously he was there in the morning. He was one of the first people that we see, and after he gets off the couch, shaves, and then comes out, he gets a drink. And then right off the bat with the bartender, he starts talking about what it takes to succeed and why some people do and do not succeed. And it was very interesting to see this like from a raw reaction because at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. at a bar, I feel like this is one of the last things that you would expect to hear. So it was really cool just to like hear this sort of thing, and it foreshadows later on that you'll see that like Michael's very close with the bartender and everybody that's around there because this to me is not like a normal thing that you talk about at a bar. So yeah, like as I said, throughout the day, there's different conversations and interactions that are being picked up by the cameraman. Very raw, like content, in my opinion. Like you never really expected how the other person was going to react on whatever was said, and there's a variety of things, whether it was like very casual conversation of talking about like, oh my beer tastes good. How's your beer taste? Versus like some things that got really personal, like Bruce, one of the characters I mentioned, he was a veteran, and like he talked a lot about how he feels like veterans are casted away once they come back to the states, um, and they're just not appreciated like he thinks they should be. So there's a lot of different things that were going on throughout the entire film, and you also realize that this is like a tight knit group of people, and to me it resembles like a big family. One of the scenes that really made me think like this is everybody is at the bar and they're just talking to each other. And whenever somebody opens the door to like get into the building, there's a ringing noise that occurs. So everybody's like alerted and they know that, oh, someone's coming. And every time they hear that, everybody like turns their shoulder to look who it is. They know who it is, of course, because like they're all regulars. And they get like this huge encore, and like everybody like comes up and hugs them, asks them how their day is, and like already starts going off on like how much they appreciate that person and like the impact that they've made in their life. Like obviously if this is like a bunch of strangers drinking together, this isn't something that you would do. So you can tell that like these people have spent a lot of time with each other. Um, and like that's kind of it's interesting and cool to see in like a bar environment. It's not what you'd expect. And then, like, more specifically of, like, what the cameraman was doing, he was, like, really just recording all these people enjoying the last night that they would all have with each other, because they know, like, the bar is gonna close the next day, so they weren't really thinking about what they're gonna do after it's closed, and they're really just enjoying their time now. And the night officially ends at 4:40 a.m., and everybody's, like, lighting small fireworks, and, like, they were, like, throwing a cake. It was, like, this whole, like, little celebration thing to, like, finally be like, "Okay, this is, like, the last time that we're all gonna be here." And then, like, you see some people before that scene, and you see some people after that scene, but there's a lot of different emotional reactions from people leaving for the last time. So, like, one of the characters I mentioned, Michael, he didn't technically leave because he was too intoxicated from that night. So even though he was told he couldn't sleep on the couch that night, he still ended up sleeping on the couch. But when everybody went outside to light the fireworks, he was in the bar by himself, and he was just crying, not saying anything because he knew that, like, this was a special place for him, and he wasn't gonna, like, have that place anymore because it was gonna close. You also saw Bruce. He, like, at first it didn't look like he was crying, but the cameraman, like, panned the camera so you could see his face. You could see there was, like, tears coming down his face. So he was obviously upset. There were some people like Pete. He was, like, throughout the entire film, he was super aggressive. So he was like he kind of left, and he was, like, in a bad mood because he was, like, super agitated with Michael because he got into an argument with him. And then you had, like, a bunch of other people that were at the bar that were just, like, so drunk that they didn't really know what was going on, and they kind of just, like, wandered off. So you got, like, a whole variety of people at that bar. So some major plot points relevant to alcohol is there were symptoms of AUD that were displayed. One of them was binge drinking. A lot of the people that were there, since they knew that this was the last night that they'd be able to drink together, they were like, "Oh, I'm gonna get hammered. I'm gonna get drunk as fast as I can." So you saw a lot of people drinking, like, a lot of alcohol within a really short period of time, which is, like, it's the definition of binge drinking. And then you actually see a consequence of AUD, and that's missing work. So there was a person at the bar named Ira, and it was like 1 p.m. So it wasn't even, like, late in the day. And the bar gets a call. The bartender picks up, and it was one of his coworkers, and he knew that he'd be at the bar, and he told the bartender Ira needs to come into work because he has a shift. So he eventually, I don't know if he actually ended up going to work, but they got him out of the bar. He was already so intoxicated, like, he could barely talk. So I don't think he was fit to work, but it was it was sad to see that that was the state he was in, even though he had a job. But it was cool to see that there was a situation where we see, like, a cost of alcohol use, because in one of the lectures, it was mentioned that that was one of the main or the biggest costs to drinking alcohol was, like, limited productivity in the workplace. So that was, like, a clear cut example of how alcohol impacted that. And then there were also basic symptoms of alcohol use. So, like, difficulties in motion regulation. So, like, there was just, like, a lot of like people would get really sad or they get really angry really quickly. And you could tell that was because, like, oh, if you're intoxicated, you're gonna have a harder time processing things. So you're gonna probably be more reactive instead of passive. Like, there are people that would be chill one moment, and then, like, a minute later they'd be, like, yelling these profanities at each other. And it would, like, catch you off guard because like, you just wouldn't expect it. But obviously if you're under the influence, like, you're just gonna react purely on instinct. And then there was impaired movement and speech. One of the people at the bar, Pam, who was obviously, like, heavily intoxicated, and she was, like, having a hard time walking, and then she ends up falling in the middle of the bar area and breaks a glass. And then, like, speech wise, like, almost everybody at the bar was slurring their speech whenever they're talking to each other. So that's, like, those are all, like, clear cut examples of what happens to a person when they, like, drink enough with emotion regulation, impaired movement, and speech. And then In relation to what we learned in class, there was an example of social learning theory. So Shay Walker, she was one of the bartenders that I mentioned. She has a son, and eventually in the documentary, you see that he's drinking and he's underage. Um, and so you first see him, he's hanging out with two of his other friends in the alleyway right outside of the bar. And social learning theory emphasizes the role of learning and social environment in the development of alcohol use. And a big component of social learning theory is if you see like a mentor, like anybody that you look up to drinking alcohol, you're gonna be more likely to think that that's like an accepted behavior. So you're more likely to like conduct that sort of behavior, like drinking alcohol. And in one of the scenes before he starts drinking, he's talking to his mom, the bartender, and I don't know if this is like an allowed thing, but she was obviously intoxicated, so being around her when she's drunk probably rationalizes in his head that, oh, it's probably not that bad since my mom does it. And also, not even just her mom, being around a bar like all the time, because I assume that's not the only time that he's just chilling in the alley, like by the bar with his friends. He probably does that like a lot of the time. So if he's around people that are abusing alcohol all the time, he's gonna think that that behavior is like not as serious as it actually is, which is what eventually leads him to when everybody was outside at 4:40 a.m. He goes into the bar since no one was there, and he steals a bunch of drinks, and then he starts drinking with his friends who are all underage. Um, and another thing, I mentioned this a little bit earlier on, it's the cost of alcohol use. And Ira, he received a call that he's supposed to be at work, and he wasn't there because he was drinking. And more specifically, with the statistic, in 2010, 48% of costs of alcohol use related to reduced productivity in the workplace. And there was also like unintentional injuries, like I said before, Pam falling, and like the beer glass or the beer breaking and like the glass going everywhere. And there's like a risk of a motor vehicle crash. You don't actually see the person drive the vehicle. Hopefully somebody stopped them beforehand. Um, but this was when everybody was leaving, and he was with two other people. He was obviously intoxicated, and he was trying to rationalize to himself, like, oh, he could make it back home. He was like, oh yeah, like I'm not like too bad. As he's like swaying and he like can't walk straight. Um, so fortunately, I hope somebody stopped him before he got into his vehicle. But there's a lot of times where there isn't a cameraman that's recording that, and that person actually does get into their vehicle. So that's like a good example of like, oh, if nobody was there, there there was the high potential of a motor vehicle crash. Because if you're getting in a car drunk, the likelihood of an accident is like very high. And then I also looked at this peer-reviewed article. It's called "Effects of Alcohol Consumption on Various Symptoms of the Human Body: A Systematic Review," and it was written by Varghese and Sarika in 2022. And they talked like this article talked a lot about like what systems are affected from drinking alcohol, like your CNS, digestive system, and like a bunch of other things like increased likelihood of cancer. They actually said that like mild to like very small drinking decreases the likelihood of dementia, which I had no idea was a thing. I thought that was pretty cool. Um, Not trying to endorse drinking, but it's just something interesting. Um, and one of they talked about AUD, and they said a sign of AUD is the inability to control the amount of alcohol intake, or like spending a lot of time drinking. So obviously you see this in the documentary with Michael, where he's at the bar at 11 a.m. He takes a shot then, and he drinks throughout the entire night. And then you also see the next day when they're like officially closed, he's like trying to help clean up. It's probably him trying to cope with the fact that like he's not like the bar is no longer a thing. So he's trying to get like as much interaction with it as possible. And the bartender's like, "Oh no, it's okay." And like she gives him a drink, and it's like the morning time. And then he takes a shot and he leaves, and then like the documentary ends. So he's obviously like spending a lot of time drinking. And then there's a scene, I thought this was a very powerful scene, and it shows that it's sad, but he struggles with controlling the amount of alcohol he can take. everybody is talking at the bar. This is at the nighttime. And he has this kind of like scrunched up face. And it looks like he doesn't like looks like he doesn't want to drink the alcohol, but it's almost like he has to. So he has a shot glass in his hand and he starts bringing it up to his like face, and it's like his face is all scrunched up. And then he like puts the like glass down, and you can see there's like discomfort in his eyes, and he like pauses for like 5 seconds, like not saying anything, and like the bar is like as lively as possible, and the cameraman is just on Michael. And then after a little bit, he then grabs the glass and he drinks it, and then he obviously makes like a face. I think it was vodka. So that to me shows that like he like can't control like when he drinks, and it's kind of like once that urge kind of kicks in, he has to do something about it. Otherwise, he's gonna have like a slew of like negative effects of not drinking. So the rating that I would give this movie or this documentary is a 7 out of 10. The thing that I liked about it is there's a lot of raw reactions, like I said. Um, Obviously, if it's like the typical documentary that I watch, it's like when you're sitting in a chair and you're talking one on one with someone and you have time to prepare, it feels scripted. But to me, a lot of the dialogue here just felt very like rough. Like like it came on the top of their like it came off the top of like a drunk person's head sort of thing. Um and that was cool to see for a little bit. But the reason why like I wasn't the biggest fan is because it got redundant for a 98-minute documentary. There were a lot of like cool moments of like whatever going on of like personal stories, but a big chunk of that was a lot of drunk people just saying stupid things to other drunk people. So obviously like um I would recommend watching this, but it's definitely not like rewatchable. Like once you watch it one time, I don't think there's any like reason to watch it again sort of thing. But like I enjoyed it for the most part. So yeah, that is my entire presentation. Thank you for listening, and yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.